Hi, this is a online version of the hybrid class, the lecture portion of cisp372. Today's date is 2011-0411. So let's go ahead and take a look at Moodle and find out what we are about to learn today. Well, of course, I already know that we're supposed to learn conditional statements, which is a very, very useful feature in VBA or just about any kind of programming, because at this point all we have learned is how to use assignment statements. Assignment statements are very useful. We can't really do much without assignment statements, but at the same time, the only thing we can do with assignment statements is to change the values of parameters, change the value of variables, which is useful but not really that useful. We need to be able to use some other features in order to write more meaningful programs. And that's what we are going to talk about today. And as soon as we are done with setting up the browser, we are ready to go. Alright, I just logged in to today's folder, and here's the homework assignment that is due at 7:30 p.m. And let's go ahead and take a look at today's class. Alright, so we have these notes here for today. I wouldn't talk about the developer extension. We already talked about this stuff here. I think we are moving on to topic 5 at this point. And we're skipping the exam and we are moving on to topic 5, which talks about conditions. It talks about conditions, Boolean expressions, Boolean operators, and so on. And I will start with conditions and conditional statements. And one nice thing about using YouTube to distribute the content is I don't really need to bump up the font size. I can use the default font size, and which makes it a lot easier for me to read from my perspective. Alright. Well, the first thing is, what exactly is a condition? A condition is something that can either be true or false. In normal English, we don't really say, true or false. We say yes or no. But when we are writing programs, we always, say something, a condition is true or a condition is false. And to make a condition, there are several things. The first thing, obviously, are constants. For example, 125 is a constant. You can also have Boolean constants. One is true and the other one is false. And these words are reserved because when you type true or false in the VBA editor, you can see that the syntax highlighting for these two words are different from any other variable names. The most basic conditions or expressions that can give you a true or false value is a comparison. And we already know comparisons from elementary school. We know how to check whether x equals to y, whether x is different from y. Now this symbol is a little bit strange. Why do we use less than, greater than to represent not equal to or different from? Well, the reason is actually quite easy. Because if x is different from y, then we can say that x is less than y or x is greater than y. And that's why it is represented as less than, greater than. We have less than, we have greater than, we have less than or equal to, and then we have greater than or equal to. Now with these two, it is important to remember that the less than comes first and then the equal comes second. If you reverse the order of these two, then the operator or the comparison operator is not going to be recognized by VBA or any other programming language. These symbols are used by just about any programming language other than C. C has a slightly different way of representing these comparisons. And once you know how to make comparisons, which are the most basic expressions that can either be true or false, you can combine these, by using logical operators. A logical operator is nothing new. We use that in normal English, all day long. Negation is really just the English word not. So basically, when you say it is not the case that 12 is less than Okay, let's take a look at this expression. It's kind of interesting. 12 is less than 35. Is that true or is that false? Well, it is true. 12 is less than 35. But when you look at the negation of the whole thing, that means we are negating the true false value of 12 is less than 35. So as a whole, the negation of 12 is less than 35 is false, because 12 is less than 35 is true. Negation means whatever is false becomes true, whatever is true becomes false. And the summary of the negation operator is just 2 lines. Not true is false, not false is true. And then we have 2 other types of operators that we use commonly in programming. One is called conjunction, which is the English word and the definition of and is true and true is true, true and false is false, false and true is false, and then false and false is false, which is consistent with our normal usage of the word and. Disjunction is the fancy name of or, and the definition of or is true or true is true, true or false is true, false or true is true, false or false is false. The only time you can have a false in a disjunction is when both sides of the disjunction are false. The only time you can have a true value with a conjunction is when both sides of the conjunctions are true. And that's it. That's all the operators that we need to know for basic conditions. And then we have conditional statements. Okay, now conditions by themselves, are kind of interesting, and we can test it. Let's go ahead and write some test programs just to test conditions. And we can do something complicated. We can do something that is simple first. So let's see what we can do with conditions. Once again, we use Access 2010 for this purpose, only because Office 2010 is the only product that the MSDNAA offers that has VBA built in as a tool. So let's go ahead and name this database conditions 1, because we'll write multiple programs in today's lecture, and we'll go ahead and create a blank database. And once we are here, we'll go ahead and create a new form. The form is basically just a container for us. It's not really going to be that useful. The focus of this test program is not the user interaction, but rather how do we use conditions, and later on how do we use conditional statements. So we'll go ahead and create a blank form, and we'll go ahead and let's do something interesting. Let's do comparisons. And what we'll do is we'll have let's make 2 text boxes, and let's switch to design view first. That's the other one. Okay, now we're in design view. We'll go ahead and make 2 text boxes. Here's the first one, and we'll make a second one. Here's the second one. Alright, so now we have 2 text boxes. They're called unbound because the text box is not related to any field of any query or any database tables, which is fine because we are not really dealing with a database in this case. It'll be helpful if we open up the properties sheet, so that we can at least see the names of the 2 text boxes. Okay, one is called text 0, the other one is called text 2. And that's because if you look at the names, they don't seem to make any sense. It should be 0 and 1. Why are we skipping text 1? The reason is because when we create a text box, it also created a label. See this label here? This label is associated with text 2. And well, we can use the label for something later on, and we can realign our text boxes like this, and there's a label for the first text box too, which will drag all the way out here. Alright, let's just drag. No, I guess it doesn't let me drag just one of them because the 2 are tied in. There we go. Alright, so now we can see more clearly why we have text 0 and then suddenly we go to text 2. This is label 1, and this is label 3. We don't really need the labels in this case, so I'll just go ahead and delete the labels and only be left with the text boxes, which is text 0 and text 1. And then we'll attach a button to trigger operations. We don't really need that, but it's an easier way to trigger operations. And here's our button, and we'll cancel. We don't want it to be associated with any of these actions here, so we'll go ahead and select cancel. The caption of command 4, it's probably better to give it a more reasonable caption, such as compare, because it's going to trigger the comparison between text 1 and text 2. All right. Excuse me, text 0 and text 2. Those are the two text boxes that we have. All right. Now that we have the form pretty much set up, let's go ahead and go to compare, and we'll use a message box first, just to show the result. And let's see here. We'll go ahead and build event, go to code builder, and this should open up the VBA editor window. Alright, let's see what we can do here. Let's just go ahead and use a message box to print out the result of the comparison between those two text boxes. And the first thing we'll do is make it as simple as possible. In other words, all we want to do is to say we want to compare text 0's value to text 2's value, like that. And we want to see whether the first one is less than the second one. Now, how do you compare text values in this case? I mean, they're not numbers. How can we compare something like that? As it turns out, it's easier. It actually makes a lot of sense to be able to compare the value of text boxes, because it follows the same thing as in alphabetical order. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what this program is going to do. We switch back to form view, and we'll put something here. We'll say the first one is tag, the second one is Young. So the question now is is tag alphabetically before Young? And obviously we all know that that is not the case, because when we enumerate all the letters in the alphabet, T is after A. So as a result, TAK, which starts with T, is going to be lexically later than Young, which starts with A. But we'll go ahead and click compare, and obviously it doesn't tell us anything that is particularly interesting. It's just saying nope, it is false. That tag is less than or before Young. Alright, so we have illustrated a few important things here. We illustrated how we can compare the result of a comparison is true or false, and also in string comparison, it's really just a lexical comparison. Now, when you do something like that, you have to be careful, because if you have numbers, the numbers will not compare correctly either. Let's try this here. Let's say the first one is 9, and let's say the second one is 100. Alright, or 1000. Either way, it's fine. Okay. Now, if you think about the numbers, 9 is obviously less than 1000 as a numerical value. But when we click the compare key in this case, it's going to say that 9 is not less than 1000. That's because it is doing a lexical comparison instead of a comparison of the value of those two numbers. In other words, 9, lexically speaking, 9 is after 1. And that's why it is saying that 9 is not less than 1000. Now we click compare just to be sure. Now we can also flip it and say this is 1000, and get the other one to become 9 or just 2, doesn't matter. Then it will say true. It will say 1000 is less than 2, because lexically speaking, 1 is before 2. So that means, when you use a text box to store numbers, you cannot just compare the value of the text box in order to find out which value of the number is smaller. We need to do something else when we need to compare the values of numbers. Alright, so we have already talked through a few things. We have a comparison here, and we understand the comparison gives us a result of either true or false. Okay, well that's good. Okay, we got something accomplished here. Now let's go ahead and make our program a little bit easier to to work with. So we'll go ahead and see if we can incorporate the use of logical operators, the and the or, and also the not, the negation. We'll just do a few simple examples here. Let's see how I should do that. Well, we'll go ahead and change the compare operation here. In other words, when we compare, this time instead of just comparing to see whether they are the first one is less than the second one, let's go ahead and change it so that we incorporate the or operator here. So we'll say or text0 dot value equals to text2 dot value. So now our expression is changed so that we're asking, is it true or is it false that the first text box value is less than or equal to the value of the second text box? This is really the same thing as using the less than or equal to symbol, but we'll go ahead and see if this logic works out or not. Switch to form view and compare. Okay, this is the same as before. So let's go ahead and compare tac to tac. Okay, there we go. And since they do equal to each other, the message box should print true. And there we go. And if we make the first one less than the second one, like Young, it should still print true. And it worked. Okay, that's great. So you can change the program, a little bit and use the AND operator. Now, when you use the AND operator, it is a little bit more tricky because in this case, it will always be false because a value cannot be less than another value and also at the same time equal to the other value. These two things cannot happen at the same time. If you want to try something like this, if you want to try out the conjunction operator, and don't mind your program is not making a whole lot of sense, you can try something like this. Okay, let's see what this one does. It is asking whether it is true or false that the value of the first text box is less than or equal to the second one, and it is at the same time greater than or equal to the second one. Now, what will make this entire thing true? In other words, what will make text0 dot value both less than or equal to the value of the second text box and also greater than or equal to the second text box? Well, you got it. When they are equal, okay, because when text0 dot value equals to text2 dot value, then both of these conditions will be true. This one will be true because they are equal to each other, and this one will also be true because they are equal to each other, and because in a conjunction you need both sides to be true in order for the entire thing to be true, it will also be true. Let's go ahead and find out whether this program does what it's supposed to. Okay, let's see. When they're exactly the same, it returns true. When one is less than the other one, it returns false. And then when this one is greater than the second one, it should also give me false. And that's exactly the way it's supposed to work. Great. We have only one logical operator that we have not used here, which is the negation, the not operator. The negation operator, only appears before a Boolean expression, but it is very important. It is a very important feature. So in this case, the message box will print true if the value of text0 is actually greater than the value of the second text box. Okay, because not less than or equal to is the same as greater than. Let's see if this is the case. Okay. They should return true because the value of the first text box is greater than the value of the second text box. Okay, returns true. When they are equal, it should print false because it is not greater than. Okay, and obviously when the first one is less than the second one, let's see, is that what I used to compare? Okay, when the first one is less than the second one, it should also return false. It should also print false in this case, and it is working in all three cases. Alright, excellent. So this is really quite helpful. Now, I can go into conditional statements right now and illustrate, how we can use conditional statements. But before we go there, let's stay with just conditions and Boolean or true false value just a little bit longer. Because I want to point out that in the properties of many control elements, there are true false values to begin with. So in this case, I can write the program, or I can change the form to include a few labels. Okay, the first label is, let's say, greater than, and then we'll make the second, oops, that's not a label, here's a label. Okay, we'll make the second label less than, and then we'll make a third label, which is equal to. Okay, right here. They don't really align, one is larger than the other one, but that's not really important in this case. So now we have three labels. The first one is label 5, label 6, and label 7. They have the caption of greater than, less than, and equal to respectively. What I want to do is I want the program to only display the ones that are true. Okay, if the first text box is greater than the second text box, then only this text should appear. If the first box is less than the second one, then only the second label should appear. And when they equal, then only the third the third label should appear. Okay, so how do we do that without using conditional statements or anything that we have not talked about? Well, let's take a look here. Look at this property here, visible. Visible in the property sheet is a yes/no value. But remember, in programming, we do not use yes/no, we use true/false. So this is actually a Boolean value. And we can change our program just a little bit to make use of this. So what we'll do is we'll go to the program here, and we'll go ahead and erase the message box thing because it's just troublesome that we have to click OK every single time. So this time, instead of doing that, we'll say label 5 dot visible. We are accessing a property of an object. Label 5 is an object, and visible is a property of that object. And that can be changed, and that's why it can appear on the left-hand side of an assignment statement. And it says right here, it's either true or false. It let me select one of these two simple values. I don't want it to be that simple. I want it to do something like this. I want it to say text 0 dot value is greater than text 2 dot value. Now, why is this any different? What will this do? Well, what it's going to do is just like any other assignment statements. With any assignment statements, the right-hand side is evaluated first. Before we have numerical values, something plus 1 and so on and so forth, this time we have the result of a comparison, which is Boolean. It is either true or false. Whatever this thing is, it will be used to update the left-hand side. In this case, our left-hand side is a property of label 5, which can, in fact, take a value of true or false. So by doing this, we are controlling whether the label that says greater than is visible or not. Now, before we do the same thing to the other three labels, it is always a good idea to try it out first, just to see, before we make any more changes. Right there. All young tech, all young is not greater than tech, and that's why that label disappeared. Now, if I use Ying, which is my middle name, here, Ying is greater than tech because Y is lexically after T, and when we click compare, the label reappeared because we are directly changing the visibility of the label. Let's go ahead and make this program a little bit more fun, because we can now, since we know this method works, so we'll go ahead and say label 6 equals text 0 dot value is less than text 2 dot value, and label 7 dot visible, this is the equal to label, is text 0 dot value equals to text 2 dot value. All right. And let's go back, and I think the code becomes effective right away, so there's no need for me to switch between the design view and the form view. So let's go ahead. Oh, that works, huh? And that works. And let's see, try this. That works as well. Alright, so this program is actually working fairly well, doing what we expect it to do. Now let's go for just one more step to make this truly an interesting program. What we'll do is we'll make the visibility off by default, because before we click compare, we don't really know which one should be displayed. So we'll turn off all of them. The second thing we'll do is even more fun, because what we'll do is we'll overlap these three exactly into the same space. Now in the form, it doesn't really look that good because they are overlapped and it's hard to see which one is which one. Okay, but that's the whole point. They're supposed to overlap, because I want it to only display at the same place to display the relationship between the two text boxes. Okay, the program, the VBA part is exactly the same as before. I just changed the location, the positioning, and also the size of the labels. So let's go to form view again and click compare. It says less than, and this time it should say equal to or equal, and then this time it should say greater than. Alright, so this is I think this is a kind of nifty program, because we are just using the property, the Boolean property called visible of an object, and we are using comparison on the other side, and yet the program seems to be able to do something that is I think this is more complicated than most people think what Boolean expressions can do without using conditional statements. Alright, so now that we have gotten this part done, let's go back to the notes, because this time we want to go into conditional statements and possibly get into multi-branch conditional statements. Let's go to conditional statements first. This is it. This is the only slide on conditional statements. Now let's take a look at the conditional statement. You can read the text, that's already online. You can read the rest. What I'll do is I'll just point out the most important part. A conditional statement starts with the word if, and it ends with the words and if. It has at least two components. Okay, the first mandatory component is a condition, which can either be true or false. It can be a simple comparison. It can be the result of a conjunction, the result of a disjunction, the result of a negation, or it can be just the property, Boolean property of an object, or a variable that is of a Boolean type. So whatever it is, okay, this part here, whatever it is, it has to give you a true/false value. The second part that is mandatory is what do we want to do when the condition is true, when this conditional statement executes. Okay, so in this case, we want z to get the value of x because we want to find out what is the maximum of the two variables. Now, if you have something else to do when the condition is false, you can also specify the word else, and then after else and before and if, specify an action to perform when the condition of the conditional statement is false. So this way you have the option. Sometimes you can go here because w is less than x, and other times you can go here if w is not less than x. And obviously this program has a flaw here, because I think this one should be w and this one should be x. But nonetheless, for the purpose to illustrate a conditional statement, that is sufficient. Okay, so let's go ahead and incorporate this into our program that we have written so far. And this time, instead of using the labels to represent which one is larger, let's go ahead and use another label to find the maximum, to become the maximum of the two. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that by creating a label first. So here we have another label, and we want this label to display the maximum of the two values in the text boxes. So I just call this max here, and then we switch back into VBA, and we'll attach the action to the same button. So we'll go ahead and just write that conditional statement. We'll say if text0 is dot value is less than text2 dot value, then we'll go ahead and do something else. We'll do something else, and if. Now, this is the way I write programs, whether it is in C or Visual Basic or in any other language. I spell out the structure first of a conditional statement before I go back and fill in the content of what I want to do. Because if I do it this way, I won't forget to end a conditional statement. If you leave a couple of levels of statements like this open, sometimes it's really hard to remember where am I supposed to end that particular statement. Okay, since we're going to print the maximum in the label, so we say label 8 dot caption, in this case, is the same as text2 dot value. Okay, and then the other one will display the other label. Oops, there we go. So in here we'll say label 8 dot caption equals text0 dot value. Alright, so we have our program written. Let's go back to the form and switch to form view and see whether it does what we are supposed to do. When I click compare, in this case, ying is greater than ouyang, so the maximum should say ying. Ying, that's good. And if I put a zebra here, zebra is lexically after ying, and there should be the it should be after. So this is the maximum. Zebra should be the maximum in this case, and we click OK, and that worked too. And this program obviously will work, also when both are exactly the same, because when they equal to each other, they are both the maximum, and also at the same time the minimum. But that's that works. All right. So are we doing okay with this? Well, since I cannot really see your hands, sticking up, I would just assume that this is okay so far. So we're moving on and talk about the next topic, which is a multi-branch conditional statement. A multi-branch conditional statement is kind of interesting because it has multiple conditions. Now, in this case, let's just look at this particular example here. In this case, it means we will first check whether x equals to 1 or not. Okay, forget about x equals 3. We'll check from top to bottom. We read this code from top to bottom. And this is the first condition that we encounter. If x does equal to 1, then z is going to get a value of 52, and then we get out of the conditional statement and continue to execute whatever is after the end if. If x does not equal to 1, and this condition turns out to be false, then we go ahead and evaluate the second condition to see whether x equals to 3. If x does equal to 3, it will go ahead and change z to become 27. If x does not equal to 3, then it will move on to the next one. And since there are no more, we'll just go to the else, and then z gets a value of 10. So that means we can write the code to find the maximum of 3 variables by doing something like this. The first condition here is a confirmation that w is greater than or equal to both x and y. That makes w the maximum, and so we can assign w to z, because z is supposed to store the maximum value of the 3. If w is confirmed not to be the maximum of the 3 variables, we'll check the second condition. The second condition, which is here, confirms whether x is the maximum of the 3 or not. If x is in fact the maximum of the 3, which means x is greater than or equal to w, and x is greater than or equal to y, we'll change z to become x, because x is now the maximum. If both of these are false, if w is not the maximum, which means this expression is false, and x is not the maximum, which means this expression is false, then we'll fall through all the cases into the else case. And in that case, if you only have 3 numbers and 2 of which are not the maximum, then the third one, it has to be the maximum. So that's how we can use a single conditional statement to include the checking of multiple conditions. We can definitely do this in our test program, but since we only have 2 text boxes, it doesn't work well. We have to add another text box to get this done. Let's go ahead and do something else instead. Okay. Oh, I know what to do. know exactly what to do. We'll go ahead and change this part here. Okay, change the label part. So instead of doing something like this, we'll go ahead and change the structure of the program, which is typically what some people do. Okay, so we'll change the structure of the program, and this is obviously not as optimal or not as short as the one that I had, but it will still do the same thing. So the first thing we do is we'll assign a value of false to all three labels. The label that displays greater than, the one that displays less than, and the one that displays equal. And what we'll do is we'll disable all three labels. We'll turn them invisible to begin with, and then we'll use a multi-branch conditional statement to see which one we're supposed to turn on. So we can say if text0.value is greater than text2.value, then label 5.value becomes true, and then we'll say else if text0.value is less than text2.value, then label 6.value is true, so that we display less than. If it is neither greater than nor less than, then label 7 has to be true, or label 7 dot. Oh, okay, I just made a whole bunch of mistakes here, didn't I? Because it should be visible that gets the value true, not caption. Alright, let's go back and change that part. I just used the wrong property to change. There we go. Okay, so this program should behave exactly the same as before, because we are checking whether it is greater than. If that is not the case, then we check the less than. If that is also not the case, then we don't even need to check anything, because it has to be equal to. But just to be sure, let's go ahead and try that. Compare. Okay, displays equal, and that should display less than, and that should display greater than. Alright, so the logic is working. So which version do you like better? This version, which takes up, let's see, 1, 2, 3, and then 7 more lines, which means 10 lines. Or do you like the previous version, which only took up 3 lines? Well, it's up to you. Sometimes it's not the shorter the code, the better. It has to do with the clarity of the code. When you read the code, do you know what it is doing? That's the question. And I think the first version, that's just my personal opinion, I think the first version is clear enough, and it is shorter, it is more efficient, and I like that one better. Alright, so we have technically talked about everything that we should talk about when we talk about multi-branch conditional statements, conditions, and multi-branch conditional statements. But there is one thing that I really want to illustrate, that is kind of important, is with multi-branch conditional statements, because we are in fact testing the program from top to bottom. There are cases where you might think that the program will work in a certain case, but it does not. Okay, let's go ahead and write that program, or just extend our code here to illustrate that point. So the first thing we'll do is to say if text0.value is less than. Now when we want to spell out a literal string to compare, we can just use the double quote, and then the string the literal string that you want to specify, and then another double quote to end the string. So what this means is if text0.value starts with a letter or a symbol that is lexically before uppercase T, then we'll do the following. Okay, so we'll just use an MSG box here and say before T. Okay, that's really obvious what it is. Okay, and we'll use a multi-branch conditional statement, so we don't end the conditional statement right away. We'll say else if. So we'll say else if text0.value is greater than, let's say C. Okay, which means it starts with a C, or it starts with a letter that is lexically after C. So we'll say MSG box at least a C. Okay, and then we'll say else if text 0 dot value. Let's see, equal to, let's pick something that is in between. Okay, Nancy. Okay, so we're looking for the name specifically Nancy. And whoops, then MSG box, we found Nancy. Alright, else we'll just go ahead and say MSG box, don't know what to do with this, and if. Alright, so this program is kind of interesting because we have overlapping conditions. There are things that overlap between all three conditions. If you look at the first condition, it covers all the cases of every word that starts with a letter that is lexically before T. So that would include things that start with a C, as well as Nancy itself. If you look at the second condition, now the second condition, we won't even check the second condition unless the first condition is false. Because remember, when we evaluate the conditions of a multi-branch conditional statement, we are evaluating from top to bottom. We always evaluate this condition first. Only if it is false, if and only if this is false, we will evaluate the second one. If and only if both of these are false, we evaluate the third one. So now the question is, will we ever get to this part here that shows we found Nancy? And the second question is, what does it take in order for this program to print out at least a C instead of before T? And then the last question obviously is, do we even have a chance to say, don't know what to do with this? In other words, can we find something that is less than T and greater than C? Excuse me, I take it back. It has to be false. So can we find something that is greater than or equal to T and less than or equal to C, and it is also not Nancy? That's the question. That's what we are asking for. Okay? And the answer is quite clear. We cannot find anything like that. But let's go ahead and run the program. Give it a few test cases, just to see whether we can make it work or not. Alright, so now we used YING, and according to this logic here, let's try to find out what the program is supposed to do before we run it. Now this is another trick of learning a programming language, is you want to write sample programs to test out the concepts. But instead of just running the program to find out what the code does, it is better for you to try to figure out what the code is supposed to do first, and then you run the program to see whether it does what you think that it should do. If it does, everything is good. If it does not, it's even better, because now you have just identified a misunderstanding of one of the concepts. It is time to make sure that you clarify that. So let's go ahead and look at this code here. Okay, Y, the letter Y, is definitely not less than or lexically before the letter T, so we won't match the first case. And on the other hand, the letter Y is lexically after a C, and as a result it will print at least a C. So let's go ahead and click compare, and it says exactly that, at least a C. Very good. Now let's try Nancy and see what happens when we type Nancy in the first text box. Okay, let's track down this logic here. Is Nancy, or is the letter N, lexically before the letter T? The answer is yes. The first condition is true. So as a result, the program will execute a statement that is right after the first condition of the multi-branch conditional statement. And then after that, guess what? It gets out of the entire conditional statement. There are no other things to do after this, but the whole point is, once it prints before T, it gets out of the conditional statement. So that means it did not have a chance to compare to Nancy itself, and that's why we will never print we found Nancy. Let's go ahead and check whether that's the case or not. Okay, we have Nancy here. We click compare. It only says before T. We click OK, and it's done. It will only print one of these 4 messages at the most. But two of these messages are impossible because Nancy cannot, we cannot get to this test case here. We cannot check whether the text, whether the value of text 0 is Nancy. And obviously we cannot get to this point either because we cannot find anything that is lexically after T and also lexically before C. That's just not possible. Okay, and that's why no matter what you type here, it's still not going to match. Even if you type in something crazy like 0, okay, it's not going to work because lexically 0 is actually less than the letter T. This has to do with the ASCII code coding, which defines the ordering between every single character that is defined in the ASCII code character set. So there's a complete ordering of all the letters, all the symbols, including space, all the punctuations, all the digits, the tab character, the backspace character. They all have an entry in the ASCII code ASCII table. All right. So what is the lesson, or what is the moral of this particular code, particularly this part here? Well, if there's anything you have to learn here is when you use a multi-branch conditional statement, you have to be very, very careful because it looks like, in this case, it looks like we have a condition here that should become true, and we should be able to print or use a message box to display we found Nancy. But in reality, it does not happen. Even when we type in Nancy exactly, it does not do what it appears that it should do. It has to do with Nancy, or text 0 dot value equals Nancy is already covered by this case. Now if I change the order of this code, then it will work. In other words, if I exchange the order of these two conditions and exchange the statements after these two conditions accordingly, then it will actually find Nancy first. If it is not Nancy, then it will go for the other conditional statements. So that means if you have a multi-branch conditional statement, you definitely need to put all the more specific conditions first, and then you put all your more general conditions later on. This will make sure that you test for all the special cases first. Only if the special cases do not match, then you test for the more general case. But in this case, I wrote the program so that we test for the general cases first, and then we test for the special cases, and that's why it did not work. But regardless of all the ordering of these conditions, this part will still never print because there's no such letter or punctuation that is greater than or equal to T and less than or equal to C. That just does not exist, and that's why the last message, don't know what to do with this, will never print. It will never. This message box will never get displayed. All right. Well, so I think we have covered everything in the conditional statement and multi-branch conditional statement module, which is module 10162. Let's go back to our class note here. The next one is called pattern matching in VBA. We'll talk about that next time, or at least in another video clip that I record using YouTube. I will have a homework assignment ready later tonight that is related to conditions, conditional statements, and multi-branch conditional statements, and it's going to be related to the sample program that I just captured, that you just saw, which is great because it is all getting recorded at this point. So at that time, when the homework assignment is ready, I will definitely send an email message to all of you through your iMail account to let you know that an assignment is ready. So right now, what I'll do is I'm going to add a new topic to our latest news and say the class is cancelled, but the material is not. Okay. Oh, I cannot do this because I have not uploaded the video clip because it's still getting recorded. So okay, never mind this part. I'll do this part later. because I have to first stop the recorder, upload it to YouTube, and then I'll send you a note to let you know that it is available on YouTube. All right. Well, I hope you find this useful. Even though we are not meeting in person in the class, I'm hoping that some of you will find this video clip useful. We still cover the material, even though I cannot answer your questions, like in the real class. At least there's some coverage of the material, and in some way, this is better than in the class because you can stop the recording at any time and then rewind it and to listen to what I said, just seconds ago without any problems. In the class, it's not like, I don't want to repeat what I said a couple of seconds ago. It's just that most of the time I cannot remember what I said a couple of seconds ago. It's easy for me to move forward, but moving backward is difficult. It's really difficult for me to backtrack, what I have said or what I have done. All right. So I hope you find this useful. I'm going to send it to YouTube right away and then send you guys a link to the YouTube clip. And when a new homework assignment is ready, I will also show you guys the new homework assignment and send you an email to let you know the new homework assignment is up. I'll probably do that tonight. After I disclose this, I will also do the same thing with disclosing the solution of the homework that is due tonight at 7:30. And then, in the same video note on YouTube, I will give you the new homework assignment. I think that should work out fairly well. Alrighty. I hope you find this useful.